Now that I'm about 25 essays into my Fire Country video essay series, I've started to notice that the people around me who watch the show take my opinions with maybe a little bit more credibility than I have any right of having my opinions taken. I was sharing with a member of the Fire Country book club a theory that I have about the Zabel Ridge arson, and she said to me, well, you're probably right, because you've been right about everything else so far. It's something that admittedly made me feel great, but it was only the second thing that happened that week that made me feel excited. The first was that Michael Trucco did an interview with TV Line where he shared his opinion that Luke has all of these awards and titles because he never stopped trying to impress his father. The funny thing is, this is exactly what I had said to my friends the week that On the Carpet came out. If you're wondering what this all has to do with Sharon, the topic of this video, the answer is it doesn't. You see, YouTube has these lovely rules like that you can't say the word suicide in the first 30 seconds of a video. Unlike all of those YouTubers that make videos about 13 reasons why, I would like for this video to not be put behind a wall where you have to click a button that says, this video contains topics of self-harm, watch at your own discretion. The revelation that Sharon Leone had attempted suicide shortly after her daughter's death was likely a shocking revelation for most people. In fact, I think there were a lot of people who believed that she really did just take her motorcycle out for a think and it happened to flip. However, I think most of us can agree that Walter was legitimately concerned that his daughter-in-law had attempted suicide, and that's why he either gave Vince the idea or signed off on the idea of Vince paying Ruby to stay away. I know I already talked about this briefly in my Edgewater Kingdom essay, but I want to talk about it here because, well, the idea to write an essay on how Sharon seemed to be suicidal in season 1 and how Vince seemed to be very aware of her feelings was something that I had planned to write an essay on all the way back in August, as soon as I started creating plans for these essays. Like with every other essay, I don't just want this to be going into the storyline and how we see Sharon deal with her suicidality in season 1, as well as Vince being hyper aware of her mental state, trying to manage it at least some degree. I will get around to that. That will be the bulk of this video. However, one thing that I realized is that I didn't really talk about in Sharon's essay, the Kingdom essay, or the Station 42 essay, just how much Sharon is sacrificing to continue to put on the role of being the matriarch of the Leone family. Something my mom and I talk about on a semi-regular basis is how we don't know Sharon's maiden name. The closest we've ever gotten to a maiden name in the first 3 seasons was her stepfather's last name of Fox. More recently, as of Your Voice in My Head, we found out that Ruby's last name is Quinn, but it's not entirely clear if this is Ruby's maiden name, Sharon's maiden name, or if it's the name of the latest man that she divorced. While we all know that Sharon was not a Leone at birth, like I talked about in my Edgewater video, the Leones aren't just regular folk by night and firefighters by day. Regardless of how the community feels about them, they are local celebrities. Sharon and Vince is as much an institution as it is a couple, particularly when they're out in public. But there is something that I noticed about Sharon, specifically when I was watching the first season of the show, that piqued my interest. If you remember way back in my Vince Part 1 essay, one of the things I talked about is how Vince's anger is triggered. He can go from perfectly fine to angry at the drop of a hat. Initially, I thought this was compartmentalization, where you have parts of yourself that only show up in certain contexts. But that's not really the case. As I talked about in my Riley video, you can see that Vince is having rapid mood swings as he reacts to information, but it's not just that night. Take a look at when he goes from happily making Sharon a gross green smoothie to upset because she just had to mention Bodhi. But I wasn't just making up the thought of compartmentalization. I was remembering it from somewhere, and it's from Sharon. When you watch the show with an eagle-eye viewing, like I did when I was doing my big note-taking rewatch, you start to notice how Sharon acts in private with Vince is a lot different than how she acts when she's around others. It's an important pattern to explore because it gives us a look into the toll that is being one half of Vince and Sharon, and that toll isn't negligible. Who Sharon is expected to be in public is different than who she actually is in private. The first place where we see this dynamic is actually the first scene with Vince, and it's his budget request. Sharon has almost certainly heard from Vince enough times to know why a hand crew isn't enough, but she's the one that raises the issue. Back at home, she has lots of ideas to get him the dozer that she didn't mention in public. When Vince goes to Smokey's in the next episode, we see it again when he asks if she stayed the night at Mickey's. Sharon uses the excuse that hotels have room service, when in reality, I can't imagine why she would be going to the president of the Bodhi Sex Fan Club to complain about what Vince did. When the separation between public and private is most apparent is when it backfires, or when we see her change between the two modes. The best example of this is in No Good Deed. We see Sharon in public with her CAL FIRE gear on, but she's crying because Bodhi might be dead. As the CAL FIRE search and rescue team comes, she puts the tissue away, and she's back in Division Chief mode, or as much as she can be, all things considered. Though the second that the rescuers suggest that Bodhi and Gabriella are in the middle of an escape attempt, she dares him to finish his sentence. We also see this in how Sharon treats Jake. When Sharon and Jake are alone, she treats him like a son, like in False Promises, when she tells him thank you, but actually I'm just gonna owe you forever. But when she's at work, she shifts into a different mode. In Work Don't Worry, for an example, when Sharon says to him over the radio, Jake, you keep my husband alive. At home, Jake is one of her kids. At work, he's one of her firefighters. But presenting herself as something different in public isn't a Sharon-only trait. It's something that Vince does too. Look at Fresh Prince of Edgewater and Like Old Times. Sharon gets furious in public, and Vince has to remind her that they are where other people might hear them. This works, and in both instances, Sharon is essentially like, okay, then let's go home, and storms off. You may be wondering why I'm talking about Sharon and Vince performing the role of Sharon and Vince Leone in public. This is an essay about Sharon's suicidality, after all. What I notice in a lot of media about suicidality is that it's about after the fact, trying to piece together why. The most popular example of this is obviously 13 Reasons Why, but personally, the House MD episode Simple Explanation sticks in my mind. After 13 and Foreman discover Kuttner dead in a prior episode, House spends most of the entire episode trying to find out why Kuttner ended his life, instead of House sitting with the pain of knowing that someone he worked with every day was hurting bad enough to end their life. While House tries to find some grand conspiracy about Kuttner's murder, eventually the simple explanation is correct. There's no clean, easy answer. It just happened. This episode of House actually demonstrates the point that I'm trying to make. I don't think it's useful to spend an essay trying to track down the why when the show seems to give us a reason, at least for now. We're not being asked to solve the puzzle of why Sharon wants to die. Instead, the show is simply expecting us that we will sit with the behavior that she displays. For the rest of the essay, I will be focusing on what we see throughout the season as she grapples back and forth with whether or not she wants to live. Right alongside that, I'll be showing what we see from Vince as he tries to keep her from going off the edge. I believe the first moment we see any hint of Sharon having mental health issues is quite early in the episode Fresh Prince of Edgewater. It's when Vince tells Sharon they're in public and he's worried about her stress level. He's still nervous as he follows her down to her motorcycle. She says she'll only talk about why Bodhi was saying he followed an order, and when Vince fails to keep her from driving away, he looks incredibly nervous, but he brushes it off when Eve comes down to talk to him about Bodhi. At the end of the episode, Sharon tells Manny there's no treatment for her kidney disease, and her plan was to just die. A couple of episodes later, though, Sharon excitedly presents Vince with a clinical trial and explicitly ties her hope of survival to Bodhi's presence. We never get confirmation one way or the other if Sharon was intentionally not getting treatment for her kidney disease because she wanted to die, But by the time she is presenting Vince with the trial, she is just days away from being labeled stage 5. That comes in the episode Get Some Be Safe, where she has a checkup with her kidney doctor. Vince went with her and has to detail all of the symptoms she's been having, and Vince says that she doesn't want to report them because she's fixated on the trial. I don't have strong reason to disagree with this. And like old times, when she thinks Luke turned her into Cal Fire, Sharon shows up to yell at him, and as she's storming out, Vince tries to stop her, but he's unsuccessful. He again looks incredibly nervous about what's going to happen when she drives herself home. The next few episodes are sparse in this plotline. The only hint we get of this plotline in Happy to Help is that Lily wasn't told about Sharon's kidney disease, even though she has extensive medical contacts in Los Angeles. We get a bit more in Sharon's discussions with Luke and Bad Guy after he attempts unsuccessfully to interrogate her about the fix from Fresh Prince. She says she realized that the most important thing was family. We don't get anything directly from Sharon in No Good Deed, but we get a real moment of panic from Vince. While I usually say that Vince saying Bodhi going back to prison will kill Sharon is a, yeah, sure, just your wife, bud moment, I do think he is actually worried that Bodhi being sent away may result in Sharon ending her life. It was only a few weeks ago that Sharon was excited about a clinical trial that could extend her life. Now they're potentially staring down the barrel of a situation where Bodhi could be going back to prison, potentially for an extended sentence. While Erica tells Vince that she can't just fabricate more evidence after she already fabricated all the evidence that Bodhi was guilty, Vince ends up coming up with a way to keep Bodhi from having to take the blame. I don't think there's any hint that Sharon is actually behaving in a suicidal fashion in Get Your Hopes Up. She began the day excited about being eligible for a transplant, and while she does have very strong opinions about Kara, that's just normal Sharon. At the end of the episode, when Vince finds a severely weakened Sharon after she did CPR on Kara, Vince remarks that she became eligible for transplant and nearly killed herself on the same day. Mama Bear, though, is indeed an episode with a few notable moments. Sharon rode her motorcycle to Smokies for a kidney fundraiser, while there a former 3 Rock inmate named Odin tries to cause chaos, but he pieces out when everyone steps up to protect Sharon. Vince tries to start the party back up when Sharon asks Vince to take her home, delegating the return of her motorcycle to a family friend. When that family friend nearly dies in a murder attempt aimed at Sharon, she tells Vince that Odin coming after her is karma, and she feels guilty that their karma accidentally landed on their friends. It's never entirely explained why Sharon thinks she deserved to die in a motorcycle crash. Later, when 3 Rock is attacked, she rushes out over Vince's objections. An episode later, when everyone is revealing their kidney results, Sharon says she's not taking Bodhi's kidney. While she never explicitly says, "Your life isn't worth more than mine," she repeatedly emphasizes the risks for Bodhi while minimizing the risks to herself. She allows him to donate when Bodhi says this donation will even the score, and Vince insists that isn't necessary. By the next episode, it's revealed Bodhi would have to return to prison, and Jake steps up so he isn't the cause of Bodhi being returned to prison. From there, the donation is supposed to go full speed ahead, though Sharon is very doom and gloom with the "you guys don't get to decide whether or not I stay alive" at the opening of Affair to Remember, but I will say by the end of the episode, she does hug Jake and Vince when Jake is approved for the donation. Sharon's kidney donation episode is next, and it does not go well. While filling out the forms at the beginning of the day, Sharon secretly checks the Do Not Resuscitate box. In their bedroom, Vince challenges her that DNRs are for people who are older and sicker. The only thing wrong with Sharon is kidney disease. Even her hypertension is a symptom of kidney disease. Sharon has a story about having to remove her dad's life support, and while I can't prove the story is a lie, it does seem awfully convenient that the story would be a perfect way for Vince to explain why Sharon had a DNR. My main evidence for this is that Sharon was so invested in the idea of a stepdad when she was 8 years old that she gave her mom a good luck clover, which just kind of makes it seem unlikely she was so close to her dad that she was traumatized when she had to remove his life support. But Sharon doesn't get a transplant in False Promises. Jake has an allergic reaction, and while laying in bed, she basically says, "That's it, I'm done." She declares that they're taking a road trip, and she's taking her dialysis machine with her because she wants to just live with the time she has left, even though Bodhi is standing right there and he's getting very close to going up for a parole hearing. This is basically where we land at the end of the kidney arc. Sharon has no kidney and no immediate prospect for one, since she's rejecting Bodhi's. It's safe to assume that everyone who was willing to tested, and everyone who was willing to donate and was a match stepped up. With Sharon refusing to take Bodhi's kidney, it looked very much like she was either going to die or be saved by a random donor. Obviously that didn't happen, but I will admit that I am leaving this essay off on a pretty grim place. Usually I carry these essays into season 4, and honestly we haven't gotten much. That being said, Sharon did start getting rid of Vince's things on his birthday, which is a common indicator for someone who is considering ending their life. And earlier in the season, Manny said that she was nearly catatonic. I suppose the plotline does kind of come up in Sheriff Country, with Sharon saying that Mickey had to be with her when she showered for Vince's memorial. So the writers have seemingly shelved this idea, at least for now, but I think it's an important thing to keep in mind as we finish up the season. Sharon is a character who has previously expressed desire to not be around anymore, so when all these people are getting angry at her for her perceived wrongdoings, I try to remember that she's doing her best when the person whose job it was to keep her from going off the edge literally isn't around anymore. Speaking of Vince, I think that we are all about due for a pick-me-up right now. In my next essay, I'm going to be going over Fire Country's actual best redemption story so far, and it's Vince's journey to try to be a better father. I think you're going to enjoy it because for all the talk we give about redemption, I don't think that Vince gets nearly enough credit for the journey he went on in season 1 to become a better dad. And I'll see you guys next week.